Communication. In today's presentation, I would like to talk to you about the basics of argumentation in oral communication. Arguments are claims backed by reasons that are supported by evidence. An argument is your main or large insight about the topic or the main proposition that your talk demonstrates. If you are arguing for or against something, your argument should not be obvious to your listeners, but should be one among two or more possibly competing assertions likely to be plausible to them. So it all comes down to subtlety in the way of presenting your argument. So whatever the nature of your argument, it should be limited enough in scope to be pursued in the length of time given to you to speak with available evidence. It should get to the heart of the topic about which you are speaking. There are 5 highly relevant characteristics of argumentation. Argumentation is a social process. Having an argument involves sometimes two or more individuals responding to one another's claim and support such a claim. An argument is not simply restating the same claims and reasons, rather it's supporting, modifying, or defending positions accordingly. As a process, arguments unfold based on the contributions of the dialogue participants. The second characteristic is that argumentation aims to gain adherence from an audience. So people argue to gain assent for their positions. The world is filled with ambiguous situations that arguments attempt to render more certain. So argumentation is a listener and audience-oriented activity, even if the audience is just sometimes one person. So ultimately, one wishes to persuade the audience to act on the advanced claim, whether it's to encourage action or to gain support. The third characteristic is argumentation is an art. So as an art, an argument or arguments have techniques and general principles. Therefore, it's a learned craft. So although there are suggested guidelines and argumentative tools, there's no science of argument. The fourth characteristic is that an argument involves contested issues. So as a mode of influence, an argument has persuasion as a central goal. An argument does not occur where there is consensus. The fifth characteristic is that arguments fill much of our lives. So whether we recognize it or not, arguments dominate our lives. We spend time arguing about what to eat, who to invite, when to do things, or where to go, etc. So what is the point of arguing? That the fact that people argue seems obvious, but people argue for 4 main reasons. First, to clarify thinking as individuals or groups. Sometimes individuals and groups don't know what they believe, but they are still faced with information that requires interpretation. So an argument can help individuals and groups learn about issues. Second, it's to explain or defend actions or beliefs. People have reasons for doing what they do. Sometimes the reasons are not made clear, but an argument seeks to shed light on those reasons and make them explicit and open to scrutiny. Third, it's also to solve problems and make judgments. The world is filled with controversies about how best to act, all with competing interests and evidence that prescribe a particular direction. So an argument helps facilitate decision making about what actors should and shouldn't do. And fourth, to have fun, simply. Participating in the clash of ideas can be an intellectually stimulating process that is primarily pleasurable. In fact, most arguments that people have are over relatively unimportant or irrelevant issues, But this is to say that an argument is not always that serious. So an argument is fundamentally a communicative exercise, whereas logic is a more philosophical endeavor that does not champion persuasion as a primary goal. So an argument, unlike logic, is an audience-oriented process. So for an actor to be persuaded of a belief or action, they must find the arguer's arguments compelling. So this requires audience adaptation and development of credibility, in addition to developing good, reasonable, and supporting reasons. An argument requires audience adaptation. Arguers must keep in mind that not all arguments are persuasive to all audiences. In addition to that, some techniques might be more successful than others for specific audiences. For example, professionals are more likely to want polished, analytical, logical presentations, whereas protesters, for example, are more likely to want highly charged, emotive arguments that rally moral indignation for their cause. An argument requires establishing credibility, and credibility, as classical rhetoricians recognize, involves intelligence, character, and goodwill. Intelligence means having knowledge of your subject and arguing in a clear and logical fashion. Character also means displaying traits your audience admires, like honesty, sincerity, integrity, and moral commitment. Goodwill means treating your audience with respect, putting your case in terms that they can understand, and acknowledging their points of view. Aristotle actually notes that credibility is often the controlling factor in persuasion. So if the audience does not perceive the speaker as credible, then the audience will not be as attentive to the message itself. So what is the difference between an oral and written argument? First, we have memory. Written arguments can be referenced again and again. Titles and subtitles give readers a preview of what is to come, helping comprehension of their reading. The exact phrasing of an oral argument disappears as soon as it is spoken. Consequently, listeners often understand oral arguments only in fragments rather than in their totality. So as a result, very complex arguments are really difficult to develop orally. Second, we have physicality. Oral arguments intimately involve the human body. So we have pitch, rate, gesture, and tone of voice, which are all forms of nonverbal communication that introduce the potential of understanding or misunderstanding. A written argument generally is clearer, but the friction that is possible from verbal interaction plays a large role in understanding the message that is conveyed, but body language helps in the delivery of your argument. An argument, while based in logic, is ultimately an exercise in language. Therefore, arguments are not exclusively the study of deductive or inductive reasoning. These are tasks reserved for philosophical inquiry. Instead, arguments investigate the communicative aspects of reasoning, and arguments can be divided into four general components, which are claim, reason, support, and warrant. Claims are statements about what is true or good, or about what should be done or believed. Claims are potentially arguable. So for example, saying a liberal arts education prepares students better than other forms of education is a claim, while I didn't like the book is not. No one can really dispute whether I liked the book or not, but one can argue about the benefits of liberal arts, for example. Saying, for instance, I thought the movie was cool is not an arguable statement. However, saying that movie was an actor's best thus present possibilities for argumentation. So people can disagree and offer support of why such an acting job was the actor's best, based on criteria of what constitutes an outstanding performance, etc. Reasons are statements that support a given claim, making a claim more than a mere assertion. Reasons are statements in an argument that pass two tests. First, reasons are answers to the hypothetical challenge. Why do you say that? Or what justifications can you give me to believe that? So if a claim about liberal arts education is challenged, a reasoned response could be, for example, it teaches students to think independently. So reasons can be linked most often, but not explicitly, to claims with the word because. Support substantiates the reasons offered and helps compel audiences to accept and advance claims. This usually comes in the form of evidence, and evidence comes in different sorts and tends to vary from one academic field or argument topic to the other. Scientific arguments about global warming require different kinds of evidence than, for example, mealtime arguments about the latest movie, for example. So evidence offers challenges and support to the reasons given. Warrants are the inferences or assumptions that connect the support to the claim. So warrants often answer the question, what do you have to believe in order to believe that the support justifies the claim of the reason being made. If a reason given to justify, let's go back to the same example, a liberal education, it is the improvement of critical thinking. So then the implicit assumption or warrant is that critical thinking is good. So warrants are there, and they are not just assumed, and they are rarely articulated, but they are inserted in a very subtle manner, which can make them difficult to detect. As a conclusion, I would like to conclude by bringing up Aristotle, who said that the mark of a good person, well-spoken, was a clear command of the faculty of observing, in any given case, the available means of persuasion. He discussed the idea of perceiving the various points of view related to a topic and their thoughtful consideration. While it's important to be able to perceive the complexity of a case, you are not asked to be a lawyer and defend a client. In your message to persuade, consider honesty and integrity and credibility. As you assemble your arguments, your audience will appreciate your thoughtful consideration for more than one view and your understanding of the complexity of the issue, thus building your ethos or credibility as you present your argument. So be careful not to stretch the facts or assemble them only to prove your point. Instead, prove the argument on its own merits. So deception, coercion, intentional bias, manipulation, or prejudice should not have a place in your message to persuade. And that concludes my talk for today, and thank you for listening.